At first glance, the rivalry between Iran and many Arab states seems simple. Some people explain it with religion. Others blame centuries of history, ethnic differences, or ancient grudges. But the real story is far more complex. The tension that defines the modern Middle East is not just about the past. It's about power, security, influence, and survival in one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. Across the Persian Gulf, two very different systems face each other. On one side are the wealthy Arab monarchies of the Gulf, countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Over the past few decades, these states have transformed themselves into global hubs for finance, aviation, tourism, and trade. Their skylines are filled with futuristic towers, their economies fueled by vast oil and gas reserves, and their security backed by powerful alliances with Western countries. On the other side sits Iran. Unlike its Gulf neighbors, Iran has spent decades under heavy sanctions and international pressure. Its economy has faced isolation, its currency has struggled, and its leadership has been locked in a long standoff with the West. Yet despite all of this, Iran remains one of the most influential powers in the Middle East. The reason for that influence isn't wealth or international partnerships. It's strategy. While the Gulf states built glittering cities and invested in global markets, Iran focused on something else entirely: resilience and asymmetric power. Instead of relying on massive conventional armies, Iran invested in tools that could challenge much richer rivals: missiles, drones, regional alliances, and proxy forces. And in recent years, that strategy has begun to reshape the balance of power in the region. A dramatic example of this shift happened in September 2019. Before sunrise on September 14th, one of the most important energy facilities in the world was operating quietly in eastern Saudi Arabia. The Abqaiq processing plant plays a crucial role in global energy markets, handling a large portion of Saudi Arabia's oil production before it is exported around the world. The facility was protected by sophisticated air defense systems designed to stop traditional threats: high-speed aircraft, ballistic missiles, and long-range attacks. But the threat that arrived that morning looked very different. Instead of fighter jets or large missiles, a wave of small drones and cruise missiles approached the facility at low altitude. Flying beneath radar coverage and striking with surprising precision, the attack disabled key parts of the facility within minutes. In less than half an hour, roughly half of Saudi Arabia's oil production was temporarily shut down. For a brief moment, nearly 5% of the world's oil supply disappeared from the market. Oil prices jumped almost immediately, and governments around the world suddenly realized how vulnerable the global energy system could be. Responsibility for the attack was claimed by the Houthi movement in Yemen, but intelligence agencies in several countries suggested the technology and planning likely had deeper connections. Whether directly or indirectly, many analysts saw the attack as a powerful demonstration of Iran's broader strategy. The message was clear: even the richest states with the most advanced weapons could still be vulnerable. For the Arab Gulf monarchies, that realization was deeply unsettling. Their entire economic model relies on stability. Oil exports must flow smoothly. Shipping lanes must remain open. Foreign investors must feel confident that the region is safe for business. Cities like Dubai, Doha, and Riyadh were built on the assumption that the Gulf would remain stable and secure. Iran operates under a very different set of assumptions. After decades of sanctions and international isolation, Iranian policymakers developed what they often describe as a resistance economy. Instead of relying heavily on global markets or tourism, the country focuses on self-reliance, domestic production, and strategic deterrence. This difference in structure creates a unique imbalance. The Gulf states have immense wealth but depend heavily on stability. Iran has fewer economic resources but has adapted to long periods of instability. And beneath all of this lies another important layer of their rivalry: identity. Many Iranians identify strongly with a Persian heritage that predates modern Arab states by centuries. The Persian language, known as Farsi, belongs to the Indo-European language family and is completely different from Arabic. But language is only one part of the divide. Religion also plays a powerful role. Iran is the largest center of Shia Islam, a branch of Islam followed by a minority of Muslims worldwide. Most Muslims, roughly 85 to 90%, belong to the Sunni branch. The major Arab Gulf monarchies are predominantly Sunni states. In several parts of the region, however, large Shia communities live within Sunni-ruled countries. These communities exist in places like Bahrain, parts of Saudi Arabia's eastern region, and southern Iraq. For many governments in the region, this demographic reality creates a sensitive political fault line. For decades, that divide existed but remained relatively manageable. But everything changed in 1979. That year, a revolution inside Iran overthrew the country's monarchy and replaced it with a new political system led by religious leadership. And the impact of that revolution would transform the entire Middle East. The year 1979 marked one of the most important turning points in the modern Middle East. Before that year, Iran looked very different from the country we know today. For decades, Iran had been ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a powerful monarch who maintained close relations with Western countries and neighboring Arab states. His government promoted modernization, economic development, and strong military ties with the United States. Many Arab monarchies in the Gulf didn't necessarily like the Shah, but they understood him. He was predictable. He supported regional stability, strong oil markets, and cooperation with other governments. But everything changed when a massive revolutionary movement swept across Iran. Millions of people took to the streets, protesting corruption, inequality, and political repression under the Shah's rule. The protests eventually forced the Shah to flee the country. In his place, a new leadership emerged under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The new Islamic Republic of Iran was unlike any government the region had seen before. Instead of a monarchy, Iran became a theocratic republic led by religious scholars. Khomeini believed that political power should be guided by Islamic clerics, not kings or secular politicians. But perhaps even more alarming for neighboring countries was the revolutionary message that came with it. Khomeini didn't see the revolution as something meant only for Iran. He believed it should spread across the Muslim world. In speeches and broadcasts, the new Iranian leadership openly criticized monarchies in the region, arguing that many of them were illegitimate and corrupt. Kings and emirs across the Gulf suddenly found themselves facing a government that questioned their right to rule. For Saudi Arabia in particular, this was deeply threatening. Saudi Arabia's leadership derives much of its legitimacy from its role as the guardian of Islam's two holiest cities, Mecca and Medina. The Saudi religious establishment also follows a strict interpretation of Sunni Islam that historically views Shiism with suspicion. Now, just across the Gulf, a revolutionary Shia-led government was claiming leadership of the broader Islamic world. To many leaders in the Arab world, this sounded less like diplomacy and more like a challenge to their authority. But the fear wasn't that Iran would immediately send tanks across the Gulf. The fear was that Iran might inspire people inside their own countries. Throughout the region, Iranian leaders began speaking directly to Shia communities living in Arab states. They encouraged political activism, protests, and resistance against governments they considered unjust. In places where Shia populations already felt politically marginalized, these messages sometimes fueled unrest. In Saudi Arabia's oil-rich eastern province, protests erupted in 1979 among members of the Shia community who demanded greater political rights and economic opportunities. Bahrain, another Gulf country with a Shia-majority population ruled by a Sunni monarchy, also experienced periodic waves of protest in the following decades. Whether Iran directly organized these movements or simply encouraged them remains debated among historians and analysts. But from the perspective of many Arab governments, the distinction hardly mattered. The perception was enough. Iran had transformed from a neighboring state into a revolutionary force that could potentially destabilize the region from within. Then another major event reshaped the geopolitical landscape. In September 1980, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein launched a massive invasion of Iran. Officially, the conflict began over territorial disputes along the Iran-Iraq border, but the deeper motivations were political. Saddam feared that Iran's revolutionary ideology could inspire Iraq's own Shia majority to challenge his rule. Many Arab governments quietly shared that concern. Despite Saddam Hussein's authoritarian reputation, Gulf monarchies saw him as a barrier against the spread of Iran's revolutionary influence. As a result, several Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, provided Iraq with enormous financial support during the war. Billions of dollars flowed into Baghdad to sustain Iraq's military effort. The war quickly turned into one of the longest and bloodiest conflicts of the late 20th century. For 8 years, the two countries fought brutal battles across deserts, marshlands, and cities. Both sides used large armies, heavy artillery, and even chemical weapons. By the time the war ended in 1988, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians had died. Entire regions had been devastated, and neither side achieved a decisive victory. But the war left a lasting psychological impact on Iran. From Tehran's perspective, the conflict confirmed a powerful lesson. When Iran was under attack, many of its Arab neighbors were willing to fund its enemies. That experience shaped Iran's future military thinking. Instead of building a massive conventional army capable of fighting traditional wars, Iranian strategists began developing a different approach. They concluded that the best way to defend Iran was not by fighting large battles on Iranian territory. Instead, they would extend Iran's influence far beyond its borders. Rather than relying only on tanks and aircraft, Iran began investing in networks, relationships with political movements, militias, and armed groups across the region. This strategy would allow Iran to project power indirectly. If conflict ever came again, Iran wouldn't fight alone. And the first place where this new strategy took shape would be Lebanon. Iran's new strategy of projecting influence beyond its borders began to take shape in Lebanon during the early 1980s. At that time, Lebanon was already trapped in a devastating civil war. The country had fractured into competing factions: religious groups, militias, foreign armies, and political movements, all fighting for control. Amid this chaos, Iran saw an opportunity. Shortly after the 1979 revolution, Iran sent members of its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, often known as the IRGC, to Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. Their mission was not to occupy territory, but to organize and support local allies. Working with Lebanese Shia groups, Iranian advisors helped create a new militia movement that would eventually become one of the most powerful armed organizations in the Middle East. That group was Hezbollah. At first, Hezbollah was relatively small. It operated mainly as a resistance movement against foreign military presence in Lebanon. But over time, it grew into something much larger. With financial assistance, military training, and strategic guidance from Iran, Hezbollah steadily expanded its capabilities. It developed its own command structure, intelligence networks, and political organization. Today, Hezbollah is not just a militia. It is a powerful political and military force within Lebanon. The group holds seats in the Lebanese parliament, runs social programs, and commands an extensive arsenal of rockets and missiles. Some estimates suggest Hezbollah possesses more than 100,000 rockets, making it one of the most heavily armed non-state actors in the world. For Iran, Hezbollah became proof that its strategy could work. Instead of deploying large numbers of Iranian soldiers abroad, Tehran could support local partners who shared its interests. This approach allowed Iran to expand its influence while avoiding direct confrontation with powerful adversaries. And soon, another opportunity appeared. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein's government. For Iran, this event dramatically reshaped the regional balance of power. Saddam Hussein had been Iran's most dangerous enemy for decades. His removal created a political vacuum in Iraq, one that Iran moved quickly to fill. Iranian officials began building relationships with Iraqi political parties, religious leaders, and militia groups. Many of these groups were composed of Shia fighters who had previously opposed Saddam's regime. Over time, these networks became deeply embedded in Iraq's political and security structures. Several of the militias that emerged after 2003 eventually became part of a broader coalition known as the Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF. While the PMF officially operates under the Iraqi government, many of its most powerful factions maintain close ties to Iran and its leadership. For Iran, this development carried enormous strategic significance. Iraq no longer served as a hostile barrier between Iran and the Arab world. Instead, it had become a friendly buffer state, and in some ways, a strategic partner. From the perspective of Saudi Arabia and other Arab governments, this shift was deeply concerning. Iran's influence was no longer confined to the other side of the Persian Gulf. Now it was directly present on their borders. But Iran's ambitions extended even further. Over time, Iranian strategists began pursuing a broader geopolitical objective, sometimes described by analysts as a land corridor. The concept was simple but powerful. If Iran could maintain influence across Iraq and Syria, it could establish a continuous network stretching all the way to Lebanon and the Mediterranean Sea. Such a corridor would allow Iran to move equipment, weapons, and personnel across the region through friendly territories. This would reduce Iran's reliance on vulnerable air routes or sea lanes that could be monitored or blocked by rivals. The Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, became another key piece of this strategic puzzle. When protests against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad escalated into a full-scale conflict, Iran quickly intervened to support the Syrian government. Iranian advisors, allied militias, and Hezbollah fighters all played roles in supporting Assad's forces during the war. With assistance from Russia and other allies, the Syrian government eventually regained control over much of the country. For Iran, maintaining influence in Syria ensured that the corridor linking Tehran to Lebanon could remain open. This expanding network of allies and partner groups has sometimes been described as an axis of resistance by Iranian officials. The idea is to build a coalition of movements and governments that oppose Western influence and challenge Israel's regional position. But for many Arab governments, this growing network looks very different. Instead of a defensive alliance, they see a strategic encirclement. To the north, Iran has influence in Iraq and Syria. To the west, its ally Hezbollah holds enormous power in Lebanon. And to the south, another conflict would soon open a new front in the rivalry between Iran and the Gulf states. That front would emerge in Yemen, and it would expose a new kind of warfare, one where relatively cheap technology could challenge even the wealthiest militaries in the region. While Iran was expanding its influence in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, another conflict was quietly developing to the south of Saudi Arabia. That conflict would emerge in Yemen. Yemen has long been one of the poorest and most politically unstable countries in the Middle East. Its mountainous terrain, tribal politics, and weak central government have made it difficult to govern for decades. In 2014, a rebel group known as the Houthis seized control of Yemen's capital, Sana'a. The Houthis come from a community that follows Zaidi Islam, a branch of Shia Islam that differs in several ways from the dominant form practiced in Iran. Because of this, their relationship with Iran was never purely ideological. Instead, it developed largely through shared strategic interests. Both Iran and the Houthis opposed the Saudi-backed Yemeni government, and both saw an opportunity to challenge Saudi influence in the region. As the conflict escalated, the Houthis gradually improved their military capabilities. They began using ballistic missiles, drones, and other advanced weapon systems that allowed them to strike targets far beyond the battlefield. In response, Saudi Arabia formed a military coalition in 2015 and launched a large air campaign aimed at restoring the Yemeni government. Initially, many analysts expected the operation to end quickly, but the war turned into a prolonged and costly stalemate. Despite years of bombing campaigns and military pressure, the Houthis remained in control of significant territory. More importantly, they began launching attacks deep inside Saudi Arabia. Airports, oil facilities, and infrastructure were repeatedly targeted by drones and missiles launched from Yemeni territory. These attacks revealed something unexpected. Modern warfare was changing. A Patriot missile interceptor used to defend against incoming threats can cost several $1 million for a single launch. Meanwhile, many of the drones used in attacks can be assembled at a fraction of that cost. This imbalance created a strategic problem. Defending against large numbers of inexpensive drones or missiles could become extremely expensive, even for wealthy countries. For Gulf states that had spent decades investing in advanced military technology, this was a troubling development. It suggested that smaller actors using unconventional strategies could still inflict serious damage. But beyond the battlefield, geography continues to play a decisive role in the rivalry between Iran and the Arab states. One of the most important locations in the entire global energy system is the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean and serves as the main route through which oil and natural gas from the Gulf region reaches international markets. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through this strait every day. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Iraq depend heavily on this route to export their energy resources. Iran controls much of the northern coastline overlooking the strait. Because of this geographic position, Iranian military planners have long considered the strait a powerful strategic lever. Even the possibility of disruption can have global consequences. If tensions escalate, Iran has repeatedly suggested it could attempt to block or restrict shipping in the area. Such a move could cause energy prices to surge and create serious economic disruptions worldwide. For Gulf states whose economies depend heavily on energy exports, the security of this waterway is absolutely critical. This is one of the main reasons why the United States and other international partners maintain a strong naval presence in the region. But the most dangerous dimension of the rivalry may still lie ahead. For years, Iran's nuclear program has been a major source of concern for many countries in the Middle East and beyond. Iran insists that its nuclear activities are intended for peaceful purposes such as energy production and scientific research. However, many governments worry that the technology could eventually allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. If that were to happen, the strategic balance of the Middle East could change dramatically. A nuclear-armed Iran would be far more difficult to confront militarily, and it could embolden Iran's regional strategy. Saudi Arabia has already signaled that if Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, it would likely pursue its own nuclear capabilities. That scenario raises the possibility of a nuclear arms race in one of the most volatile regions of the world. At the same time, diplomacy has occasionally offered glimpses of a different path. In 2023, Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to restore diplomatic relations after years of tension, with China acting as a mediator between the two countries. Embassies reopened, and both sides signaled a desire to reduce tensions. Yet many analysts believe this rapprochement represents a pause rather than a permanent resolution. The deeper strategic competition remains. On one side are the Gulf monarchies whose primary goal is stability, secure trade routes, strong economies, and predictable borders. On the other side is Iran, a state shaped by revolution, sanction, and a desire to reshape regional power structures. As long as these two visions compete, the rivalry is likely to continue. For now, the Middle East remains locked in a complex balance of power, one defined by proxy conflicts, shifting alliances, and strategic caution. The situation is tense, but it has avoided full-scale war for decades. Whether that balance can hold in the future remains one of the most important questions in global geopolitics. And as long as energy, trade, and security remain tied to this region, the world will continue watching closely.